This is the inaugural interview of the India in the Margins initiative. I'm going to begin by interviewing Anish Kumar. Anish is one of the leaders of the organization called Transform Rural India. He has also been on the leadership team of India's leading nonprofit, Pradhan, probably one of the most impactful NGOs in the past 25 years. His expertise includes creating business organizations run by poor communities, facilitating the participation of smallholder farmers in modern value chains. Anish has developed and piloted a smallholder poultry prototype. He was the CEO of the first poultry cooperative of India, and he has scaled up the model across vast new geographies of India. He is a board member of the National Smallholder Poultry Development Trust, which is an advisory and policy advocacy body. Anish has also been a member of the Indian Planning Commission Working Group on Disadvantaged Farmers. He's been involved in the design of policies and programs aimed at producer collectives and cooperatives all across India. Anish, welcome. Thank you for talking to us today. Um, I would love to start by asking you about the organization that you are heading right now, which is Transform Rural India. Tell us what inspired you to set this up, and how is it going?
First, thank you very much, Shareen, and it's such a privilege and pleasure to be here on this conversation with you. We have known each other for some time now. On this, conversation which connects youth everywhere to issues that matter to them because. In some ways, these issues shape the tomorrow that more than us, they are going to inherit. So that's a very important conversation, and very grateful that you have set this up. And it's a real privilege to be the first ones on this conversation. So, if I will start, by talking about Transform Rural India Foundation and how we set it up. Let me first switch off my video so that is something that the bandwidth doesn't interfere with us as we go along. So I formally co-lead TRIF with Anirban, and Anirban is someone that I have been together since '94 actually. We have shared worldview, concerns, and passions of making the world, you could put it as more just and equitable. Two things actually happened around very similar, time frames in 2013-14. Both of us, as a part of you said Pradhan's leadership, we were involved in an institutional review of Pradhan. It was done by Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research, and we started working on a new vision for Pradhan. This vision essentially captured those times, and you would know there was a new yearning for change, a new aspiration, and that changed India, as you know, substantively in 2014. The demand for communities from organizations like us was to go beyond economic development in issues that matter to them in an everyday way, like their children's education, health, and we realized that to work on multiple issues, we would need to become a smaller player on a bigger canvas because life is a much bigger canvas, and not be confined to the smaller canvas and remain a big, as Pradhan was, a very important and a large player in the lives of the economic slice of their lives. And around the same time, so that is the one part of the context, was this internal process of review and new vision in Pradhan. The second was one of long-standing partners of Pradhan, Tata Trust, had a change of leadership. Mr. Tata, started as full-time chairperson there. It had a new executive leadership in Mr. Venkatraman. So as it happened, we took him to show our work on livelihoods. And during this visit in deep Jharkhand, in one interaction, you would say was sort of a epiphany moment where a woman, we were, just having a chat with her. Her daughter was by her side. We asked, "How do you like your children to be when they grow up?" And she responded, "Like you." And this woman, a farmer whose income had increased tenfold to 200,000 Indian rupees, her life had visibly improved. We could see that more food availability, more income. However, the quality of life on several counts had not changed. For example, schools in her village were non-functional. We actually met her during school hours in the primary school in the village, which was where teacher was absent and it was non-functional. Similarly, healthcare were non-existent. So this response from her state and reflection from Pradhan's visioning exercise sort of gave birth to TRI. Initially, it was a joint initiative between Tata Trust and Pradhan. Now we are an independent organization. What that uh, woman in the village essentially was saying is two interlinked things. One was her quest for a better life and accelerated intergenerational mobility was the second part of it. And that in some ways became the tripod of TRI's engagement over a period of time. So one, the multidimensional change, and as Jeff Sachs puts it so well, is you can't move on one without moving on all, and that's what Millennium Development Goal or SDG goal is all about. The second is community is central to everything. It is again that very pithy way of putting it, nothing about us without us. And the third peg of our engagement became what we call as intersector or multi-stakeholder work, essentially saying that no one organization or sector has solutions. We need all hands on the deck. Poverty is too complex. So coming back to what it means to be at together with Anirban here, what we have told ourselves in TRI is that all of us we have to steward the vision, translate it into action, because there are too many interlinked engagements, and all of us are some ways leaders of this. We have obviously put a structure in place. There, and as a part of our pre-work on setting TRI, we wrote detailed theory of change, a results framework. We did baseline in all the sub-districts that we were and are going to start pilot. We got India's leading evaluation agency, Sambodhi, as our institutional partner, had conversations with people like Michael Walton and Isabel on our theory of change. And we put all this in our public domain. It's on our website even now. This was actually much before we got down to work or we incorporated ourselves.
Thank you, Anish. That was, a great overview of what you've been up to. If I were to pivot a little bit, I'd say for more than 25 years now, you have been working in rural India, right? And you've been working in East India, especially the state of Jharkhand. Can I ask you, just in your experience and your career, who have you found to be most vulnerable, most disadvantaged in these contexts?
And this is something, Shane, I have reflected deeply. First time when I landed in Jharkhand, this was a beautiful, place called Sundar Pahari, literally meaning beautiful, hillocks. This is a tribal, indigenous community, block, sub-district in a district called Godda in, again, remote, this is southeast Jharkhand. Earlier it was part of undivided Bihar. It is India's poorest state, as we know. So, and I will, talk about marginalization specifically in context of India, because I see very unique features. We are a continuous civilization for very long, with very few interruptions, like you could say
Mhm.
the Bronze Age collapse, and it has been a huge melting pot. But unlike America, it's a very old place. Over several millennia, it has gathered various kinds of successes and also prejudices. The cleavages that we see in our society, religion, caste, ethnicity, class, gender, the feudal patron clan, or the rule ruler, or even color. These are, shape the context of marginalization in our society, and these are a product of our own unique civilizational journey, encounters with Western civilization over millennia, colonization by British, and the ongoing shaping of a modern nation state, a unique experiment by itself. The marginalization and vulnerability that we see today is rooted in this kind of a coexisting ancient regime, if you were to call it, a continuous thread of religio-cultural otherization is something when I reflect more and more, the outcasts, Dalits, or Malets have been, a word with us for very long. We used to refer Greeks in the times of Magadhan, ascendancy in the 300, 400 BC, and later Islamic times, or in some ways, burning of Khandava forests by Pandavas. Actually, Delhi, where I stay, and derives. This is a place called Indraprasth Extension. It derives its names from the mythical story. Uh, I guess first imagined somewhere around 400 BC, actually before formation of organized states, as we know, that was burning of this forest to throw out the local tribes, Nagas, and their king by to build a capital for Pandavas. So that's Arjun's success in those days. If it is a true story, I don't know, it is a myth or a story, but is visible in the isolation and marginalization of indigenous people on this land. And Jharkhand, as you refer, was a movement which was built around rights of the indigenous people. Jharkhand literally means land of forests. There is some evidence, very hotly contested, and so I leave the politics of that contestation aside. That and there is DNA evidence also to that effect, but I'll leave that aside. The marginalization of the city and rural folks from the Harappan civilization into outcast and Dalits, the otherization of Ionians in the times of Patliputra and Magadhan ascendancy. That's my home state, Bihar. This today, and women actually much less said, but the institutionalized patriarchy you see across wherever humans have gone, maybe today in those spacecrafts, or tomorrow when we land up on Mars, as he plans another 5 years. He says that we should be, Mr. Musk says we should be there on Mars. We'll see patriarchy even there. But you see the way, and that is very well captured in by Tulsidas when in the epic tale of Ramcharitramanas, when he says, Dhol Gawar Shudra Pashunari Sakal Tarna Ke Adhikari. Basically saying that, animals, illiterate, the Shudras, that's the lowest in the caste hierarchy. The women are, deserving of all kinds of violence. Obviously, because of such richness that we have in culture, you would also have other tales valorizing women. But that's the if you were to look at the modern Indian state, the marginalized are in its social composition: the Dalits, backward castes, the tribals, the indigenous communities, Muslims. And in terms of occupational groups, the farmers, artisans, laborers are the most vulnerable, and women at the intersection of caste, class, ethnicity are the most marginalized. We at TRI have taken more of an operational approach, combining all these vulnerabilities into more of a locality based approach and have foregrounded it around rural. And why rural? In some ways, you will see on all development indicators, they underperform vis-a-vis urban areas. And in villages, we are a continent-sized country, so we have 650,000 odd villages. So if you were to pick up the bottom two deciles, that's roughly about 100,000 odd. In terms of infrastructure and services, you would see them in 17th, 18th, 19th, century, whatever may be your pick. And that's what we call a stranded India. That's one way of looking at this whole marginalization. Is also located in the geography where this lack of opportunities of intergenerational mobility, quality of life, abysmal public infrastructure, weak governance, weak institution, non-existent markets. This is the marginalized both in terms of ecological fragility and economic growth. And this is largely in East and Central India. And that's where a major, about 3/4 of our indigenous communities concentrated in this region. So together with the indigenous people, the Dalits, outcasts, backward communities, and minorities in this region, I would say they are the most marginalized. And today, I think if my numbers are right, this is the largest concentration of multidimensional poor on the planet. And this is where we'll win or lose. And this is also an area with various kinds of internal conflict. And in some ways, our former prime minister said this is a place of biggest internal security threat since independence. Left-wing extremism is very active. Almost 3/4 of the districts in Jharkhand are affected by it, and then the neighboring district Chhattisgarh similarly. And actually, we had last year during times of pandemic more humans dying here than our very hot international borders with China and Pakistan. It sits on very large mineral wealth and a very large young demography there who have got integrated through the communication revolution. They are armed with these small, smart phones, very cheap 4G connectivity, 3G connectivity, and they're seeing the world in their palms moving ahead, leaving them far behind. They have new aspirations and are angry. This is, I would say, the context of marginalization, which is fueling, giving foot soldiers to violence of all kinds, left-wing extremism or bigotry, that is threatening our future as modern democratic republic. So that's how I would, in a larger context, place marginalization and vulnerability in our country.
Thank you for that, Anish. A follow up question. You talked about the modern Indian state, right? And I know we want to leave politics a little bit on the side, but it's hard not to go there. But why do you think a, a modern state that has committed itself to universal adult suffrage, you read our constitution, the preamble securing justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, why is it that the Indian state has not succeeded in reaching this disadvantaged population that you're talking about, or rather these disadvantaged populations?
So, in some ways, this is also, we're about a little more than 70 years as a modern, state. There was a time when Tocqueville also, in around 70 years, had visited America. Just if you were to see his reflections on America of those days, and which didn't had adult suffrage, and which had in Deep South slavery, and you look at India, which started with adult suffrage, and as Dr. Ambedkar, the principal author of our constitution, said that it's a it's a large dichotomous situation where we have embarked on political equality before social and economic equality. In some ways, as we traversed from a subject of British rule, and before that subject of various rajas, maharajas, and moved into the role of a citizen, very little work actually happened in citizenship building. And some impact of that we see today. It very difficult for us to imagine what means to be a citizen. And that's the difference. When I read Tocqueville, I understand the effort that had gone in the early settlements in Americas, and where these the normative of democratic functioning had been laid out in a very systemic manner. So that's one area that is completely, we have just bypassed that. I don't know how. In some ways, when Gandhi said that Congress needs to dismantle and go back to the people, he meant broadly something like this, where citizen building. Without a citizen, you would not have a state also. So state would necessarily get captured by the more better endowed elite, and that's what we see in context of India. You see all our institutions of power, be it the higher bureaucracy, judiciary, media, you will see it disproportionately, captured by the elite. And today, I just yesterday the Pew survey on religion and various things came, and it made a very telling, numbers in terms of the Dalits, the other backward caste and minorities, scheduled caste, and the indigenous. So almost 80% India is like that. That's the what Kashiram used to say as Bahujan. So you don't see them represented in the state. So state is some ways, obviously, in terms of its geographical distance, the state is not as distant as the colonial times, but in terms of its attitude, also in terms of the laws that it has inherited. You see, today we have a sedition law, which given to us by our old colonial masters, who actually the British have thrown away the law, but we continue, and we continue to use it in the most oppressive manner on of citizens for free speech, any kind of dissent and free speech to clamp down. So in some ways, that's one set of challenge that we have: the structure of the state, the lack of investments in building citizenship, and the other is, which leads to the other dimension of massive demand delivery disconnect. And this is something that when Dr. Galbraith was the ambassador here, he used to call it as a functional anarchy, and he used to, pinpoint this demand delivery disconnect. We actually today, and if you were to, look at the same thing, you would look at it much beyond. On the demand side, it is about not just some demand for services. It's about dreams, aspirations. Similarly, on the delivery side, it is much beyond and delivering few public services. It's about how public policy gets shaped, and how much of the kind of crony capitalism that we have seen in the last 3 decades or so, since the liberalization of Indian economy in 91. In some ways, this whole demand delivery disconnect expanded into the larger collapse of governance structures and the frontline bureaucracy, has led to a very different kind of a challenge. And the growth, you see, in when I started in 94, There was a very different time. You had only Forbes started, I think, in 91 odd, doing these billionaire numbers. And 94 had $2 billionaires in India. I think Birlas and maybe Ambani's were there. Today it has over 150. It is the third largest. It has outstripped even Germany after US, China. India has the largest number of dollar billionaires. So while India has grown very fast in terms of inequality, it is right at the top. And just look at the workforce in terms of the informal sector. Globally, it is vulnerable informal jobs. It is right at the top. So I see these four, five interlinked things together have, maybe would define the state of our society as it exists today. We have done enormously well on various things. When I say this, I say it with the regret that how much more we could have done if we had got few things right. Just look at next door China. We were, and until 80s, we were almost on par every development indicator, and the investments they made in social sector and education and health, and they just have outstripped us, become the manufacturing the factory of the world. And in India, it's very difficult to catch up now. COVID crisis showed the precarity of the healthcare sector, the job sector in India. So a combination of things, Shareen, I would put it like that.
Thank you, Anish. That was profound. You gave us a lot to think about. Um, Another piece of your work has focused so much on not just focusing on those who are disadvantaged or vulnerable, but on building collective strength and partnerships through a broad set of stakeholders, right? Connecting them, those who are disadvantaged, to a broad set of actors. So I'd love to hear more about, your belief in the power of collectives and how you say, no one organization has all the answers or all the solutions, and you need all hands on deck. Could you speak to that? Like, what drives your belief in partnerships, and what kind of partnerships do you believe in?
So when we began engagement in 2016, we got together an intersector collaboratory. As we said, we need Bajar Samaj, Sarkar, the market, state, and communities together, given the complexity of the challenge on hand. We understand that to solve a problem which has multiple origins. One set of things is about infrastructure and services, which we talked about. The other set is about the norms and practices which are mostly in the realm of community action. So unless, and again, I refer to Gandhi, who was, when he talked about Gram Swaraj, he talked of Swaraj also in the sense of how it involves each one of us. And we firmly believe that focus inward and to examine what can be done by oneself is also a very important pathway. Communities would require our support to move out of poverty. And the way we structured our pilots was to bring in expert organizations to help communities build those capacities around health, around education, around economic development, livelihoods at one end. And that was essentially to build their capacities to do various things by themselves or with a little bit of support from the public system. The second was to build their capacities as citizens to demand. We have a very sort of, we are a welfare state. I don't fully agree with that, but there is a set of rights and entitlements, particularly the time between 2004 to 2014, those two terms of UPA government had brought in various kinds of rights related to livelihoods, food security, and if the communities got together to demand those, make claims on those rights which as citizens they were entitled to, that would also and get them going in a variety of spaces, including health, education. There's a right to education and food security. So that was one part of our effort. The second part of our effort was to look at government. And government, we realized in the geographies we talked about, for example, Jharkhand, and these places who are disproportionately dependent on government for basic things, education, health, nutrition needs, and stuff like that, because markets are mostly absent there. So we said that we'll work with the government and try to create a sort of a compact. One set of compact was with these 4 or 5 organizations coming and engaging with the community. So there is a community CSO compact, and at the other end was the compact with the frontline, frontline of the government machinery. You could call them service providers or duty bearers of public services. So this compact at a locality level is what we attempted to build, and we had very good results. And it is just 4 or 5 years into it, but we think that's the way forward to get a locality based compact between community collectives. These were all women collectives, the local governance institutions there, the panchayats, and the frontline of the government administration. It could be, for example, in case of education, it could be the school teacher in primary school. In case of health, it could be the ASHA, Anganwadi, A&M worker. These are the frontline health workers there. So like that, or in case of rural engineering services, it could be the junior engineer there. Get them together to look at the locality, the challenges, the issues, the opportunities that this geography presents for growth of everyone, and get this kind of a compact, this kind of a collective going. And that's what we engaged in the last 5 6 years, and we are very bullish on it. And going forward, we think this kind of approach could solve various issues. Particularly, we saw that coming to fore during COVID times, where it was very important for communities to get together in terms of first understanding what this pandemic is all about, how they could take preventive measures, how they could quarantine their fellow villagers, returning as migrants from the cities, how they could isolate, quarantine them, how they could identify the infected among themselves. These are one room, two room huts, settlements. So from those houses, if someone is infected, the disease will spread very fast, how isolation could happen. So in this we realized between them, they could create, as we keep calling the bubble, not get COVID out of hand. And I see that opportunity with ecosystem restoration, with handling pandemics, with handling local economic opportunities in a much better way.
Thank you, Anish. This makes me wonder, listening to you talk about building coalitions at the grassroots to deal with intensely local challenges in the face of really global pressures, right? Like whether it's COVID or you were talking earlier about livelihoods and growth. How do you feel when you listen in on the global conversations, whether it's about COVID or it's about SDGs at the United Nations, as you work at the grassroots and address challenges at the grassroots? Do those conversations resonate with you or do they frustrate you? How do you feel given that you're listening to both sides?
So, and I see both. connect with those conversations. And as it happens, this is the decade of ecosystem restoration. And when I started in 94, that was the decade of indigenous people. And I was, first time I'd gone to uh, community, the indigenous community, and there I started working on local livelihoods. Silk farming was a traditional livelihood of the people there for close to about 2000 odd years. And this is forest silk. And I looked at in terms of what I could contribute. And obviously, the market was outside the local area. So in some ways, the global when you are in a continent-sized country, you do and look at the global context in a different way. I remember when first time I landed up in Delhi from my home district in Bihar, Muzaffarpur. This was in Delhi, and at a premier college, Hindu college, and there my professor said, "Did the train not stop anywhere in between? You have come 1100 kilometers to only study." I said, yes, this was the last stop of the train. So, in some ways, there is, when you look at economic opportunities, and particularly when you start looking at, say, opportunities with forest dwellers or small and marginal farmers, given the resource endowments, the very complex resource endowments there, they have to seek opportunities of income access little away from the local area. Similarly, if one were to talk about, so I'm involved with few conversations on the climate change and uh, the disproportionate demand we have of a small farmer, poor farmers on that. So initially, I used to be very troubled. This is when people who have very poor soil and which very low carbon content there, they need fertilizers to produce minimum to even survive and get by. So there to introduce regenerative farming, because the soil itself is so degraded. And India is, facing land degradation challenge in a big way. So that disturbed me. But now I do see a merit in doing connecting the dots from the global conversations with the local issues, because some of those have become more and more visible. And now, after say 10 years back, I would have been very vocal about it and very sort of angry on the disproportionate demands that we make of the small. I realize climate variability, for example, is a reality. We are seeing less and less rains in eastern India, more and more rains in western India, and you have multiple, cycles. Today, for example, as we speak, June has seen massive rain deficit across east and central India, and crop production is affected. Sowing has been affected, and we know for the next week or so we'll have less rains. So these, you could say, planetary and footprints have started affecting the local also. So there is that local, impact of few of these things. The other way of looking at it could be, in terms of how the supply chains and the global conglomerates, like all these Cargills, AMDs of the world, move food from one part to another part, squeezing at one end the farmers, producers, and at the other end consumers, and making $1 billion. I was looking at Cargill, 125 odd $1 billion, top line last year. So what all this amounts to? So maybe, COVID has come at a time when some kind of a moderation was required in looking at these very complex supply chain moving goods and services across the planet with enormous amount of carbon footprint and maybe exploitation along the way. Maybe we could look at more localized supply chains, more and focus on local economy. So I would look at it in a more today in a more productive way rather than in a more agitated way. These conversations.
So, Anish, on that note, we've just gone through so many months of a very polarized debate on the farm laws of India, right? I mean, right before COVID hit, this was the big conversation, was the government was really making sweeping changes in the policy environment of agriculture in India. I'd love you've already spoken. I can anticipate a little bit about what you're going to say based on what you already shared. But what were your concerns about those three bills?
So actually, COVID first wave when it hit, we were in midst of the citizenship protests across India, and which sort of after the lockdown, it sort of died down. The government used the opportunity during lockdown to first come up with the ordinances in June 2020, and later on these became law in September 2020. I actually had written a piece saying how, in context of the MSP regime, the minimum support price regime, these laws would unlock opportunities and maybe give more space for small and marginal farmers beyond the granaries of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. So my position today is, a little bit more nuanced. I see a merit in what the farmers have placed. And more than anything else, the way these laws were rammed through, and the way it is expected that the farmers would accept laws which affects them in such a massive way without any consultation with them, that I see as a major challenge for us as a country. How do we govern ourselves? So that is one issue which is not related to the content of the law itself. The content of the law obviously has, and the evidences there are that it is connected with a larger sort of plan for government to move out of the green revolution era structure of guaranteed procurement from farmers through a minimum support price, which was then the grains procured were distributed through a public distribution system. So maybe all these are connected in some ways, and we also see large corporates coming in and given the power they have, and we have seen that across board. Both in other countries, America and Europe, what happened to the small farmers there. So there are some genuine fears there. But let me ask a different question in context of India. You see, when we, and that is this issue has been bothering me for some time. When we talk of a small and marginal farmers in India, and we say that about 92 odd percent of the holdings are small and marginal, we actually are hiding a big fact and invisibilizing a big fact there, and that is that close to 62% of them, and some numbers are that 72% is what in one meeting I had the member Niti Ayog, Dr. On agriculture, sharing, Dr. Ramesh Chand sharing, is about 72% marginal. So that's about soccer field kind of a thing. How would, and that's, you could look at, we are looking at about 150 million farmers, and 72 million means about 92 and 100 million. And that's roughly the number also which gets direct support under the Prime Minister's Kisan Samman program, where they get a direct financial support of 6,000 rupees annually. So these numbers, and whatever manner we now look at these numbers, these are large numbers. So what is happening to them? First time 2011 census reported that farmers, the cultivators numbers had declined and the number of agricultural laborers had increased. Agricultural laborers are also an large way linked with the urban and construction economy as circular migrants, and we saw them in the first lockdown, first wave, walking for 1,000 kilometers and what have you. So there I see the big question for India is, what do you do with the marginal farmers? And when you look at the marginal farmers, how do prevent this slide into agricultural labor and then into an migrant labor and then into a life of you know a very of a precarity of a very different in some ways inhuman nature because of lack of any kind of social protection that we have for the migrant labor force. And there, when I look at it, I see the role of government very minimal when I look at marginal farmers. So you look at these two states, Punjab and Haryana. Punjab has the average land holding is close to about 1.7 hectares, and Bihar is about zero point 0.6 hectares. So with zero point 0.6 hectares, if we were to say a Bihari and a farmer has to survive, one has to start looking beyond land. One has to look at technology. One has to look at markets in a different way, the processing, the exports in a very different way. And there the play of government is very little. So if you look at these three laws, the three laws have brought in the private sector in, one is on contract farming, the other is on essential commodities, and the third one is reforming the agriculture produce marketing committee, the APMC, the market yard, the government regulated market yards. So all of this would move or create a larger play for private sector. So while I see a merit in the farmers, and which beautifully in one article Harish Damodaran in Indian Express had captured, these are the farmers who are actually dependent on farming for their living and for their growth. So there are roughly about, he put a number of about 45, 50 million such farmers who are dependent on the existing regime, and they are materially going to be affected. So there is a point there. But I also ask a different question. What do you do about the rest 10 million? And some of them, would anyways be, going out. So let's talk about the, 60, 70, million farmers who are, left, marginal farmers who are left there. I would see, I know avoiding processing market to come in, export market to come in, and government playing much little role there. And this space would be, to my mind, and while you would talk about democratic slide, you can talk about crony capitalism that was behind these acts, the legislations, but I see opening for the marginal farmers there. So I don't know whether I am very clear on that or not, but that's how I have a more nuanced position now on the farm acts.
Well, I guess, Anish, you and I both know this, that sometimes in India, it's not what's said in these pieces of legislations, but it's the things that are not said that create risks and vulnerability, right?
Yes.
Like whether it's the laws of India you were talking about earlier, so much looks good on paper. I study environmental laws, they all look good on paper, but it's the things that they leave out where all the toxicity in our environment comes from. So, same thing over here. What is written down is one thing, what is left out is where all the action is. And that's where
Yes.
I think the future vulnerability that you're talking about, are we sowing seeds for an entire population or subpopulation to lose something and really have to find their way on their own? And that's the real question, I think, facing the kind of policymaker as well as the people of India.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you. And that is one challenge with a highly regulated country like ours. We have law for almost everything, and the law is worded in a manner in which it leaves so much of things unsaid, and so much power is discretionary power is given to the implementers of those laws, that it can actually mean very different things. So I see that there could be various issues related to our long run food security, and long run, in some ways, a farmer's control on the production system. So I do see, these acts could, pave, ways in a very insidious manner, pave ways for some of those things to come in.
Thank you, Anish, for sharing all these thoughts with us. I think our time should probably come to a close to let you go eat dinner as well. We've taken up so much of your
Yes.
evening. Um, Thank you. This was so thoughtful, so informative. And, definitely the goal of kind of reaching the global young person to get them to think in a little more nuance about real people, real lives, and our shared humanity. I couldn't have asked for more thought provoking comments. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure having this conversation, and I'm looking forward to many more such conversations with many more people, and maybe take it out to the younger people, both in India and elsewhere. We need, at a societal level, we need these conversation to, and that's what makes us one humanity, and unless we have some shared conversations, we will not have that. So I'm really looking forward to this shaping up, Shareen, very well. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Anish. Thank you. So,
Thanks.